So welcome to Just Festival and to this very special conversation with one of the UK's most loved children's poets, Michael Rosen. I'm really happy to have you with us this year, and I really want to thank the wonderful Joyce McMillan for chairing. If you hear, I'm right on the line of ambulances going this direction and a possible gig happening in this direction. So I'm going to, so bear with me if I'm dodging ambulances and dancing on this side of it. So just bear with me. I'll be switching the mic off soon. Just Festival, I'm Helen True, the festival director. Just Festival is Edinburgh Arts and Human Rights and Interfaith Festival. And through our festival each year, we bring together speakers, performers, and audiences to discuss key issues facing us as a society. We're celebrating our 21st anniversary this year with a really special live and online programme, which you can see on our website. But tonight, Michael's book, Many Different Kinds of Love, is a sad and really powerful read. It's absorbing. And when I was listening to this intimate experience, it contrasted so dramatically with the political rhetoric. I'm still filled with real disbelief and anger at the opportunistic corruption that's taken hold of the last year. And I don't know why. I still don't believe it when it's right in front of my eyes. It's extraordinary. In your book, I particularly liked the inclusion of the notes from the nurses that looked after you, Michael. And in some way, they echoed what many of us were thinking when they heard about your illness. You can't go over it. You can't go round it. You're going to have to go through it. And I think so many people wished you all power on that journey. And I'm just so happy to see you here with us tonight. Tonight's chair is the inimitable Joyce McMillan, a well-known and respected theatre critic and political social commentator for The Scotsman. She's been involved in many campaigns for democracy and human rights, both in Scotland and internationally, and has been a freelance journalist based in Edinburgh for more than 30 years now. More than 30 years.
40, I'm afraid.
40 years, you know. So before we start, it's my job to take you through some housekeeping. So this evening event is a webinar. I'd ask that you're conscious of the buttons just down below. You will see that there is a raise hand button. And at the end of the session, you're going to be able to ask some questions to our panelists. And there is also a Q&A button, which if you want to ask a question by writing it, then you can do so there. There is also a live transcript button, which if you press, you'll be able to get the gist, I think, of what most people are talking about. It's not perfect, but if you're having difficulty hearing or listening to accents and things like that, it's actually very useful. I would note that the event is being recorded by kind permission of our panelists. So if you do want to interact, you may want to interact either with your name or anonymously. So we'll be putting the event up on YouTube afterwards for a period of time. The event will last approximately 1 hour, and there'll be a chance for our guests to take the questions directly at the end. So I will pop into the picture with around 15 minutes to spare to give you a time check and prep you for your final question round. And so I'm looking forward to this so much that even my ears are smiling. Welcome all again. And Joyce, over to you to introduce Michael and to facilitate this evening's event. I'll see you all later.
Well, thank you. Is my microphone on? Yes. Thank you, Helen, and thank you very much to the Just Festival for involving me in this session with Michael Rosen, a wonderful figure in British literature and life. And as you say, Helen, much loved and very much supported on his journey through a very severe encounter with COVID-19 last year, which is the subject of the book that we're going to be talking about today. Michael is now in his 70s, was born and has lived pretty much all of his life in London. He's the author of 140 books, or more than 140, of course, with a very special interest in children's literature and in encouraging children to read. So books like his very, very popular We Are Going on a Bear Hunt have been a first encounter with reading and literature for many, many children. He was the Children's Laureate of England or of the United Kingdom from 2007 to 2009. And much of his work, really from day to day, apart from his actual writing, is concerned with talking to children and young people, and also, of course, to adult groups about reading and literature and about the joy of that, and encouraging people to get more involved in it. He's also, of course, a well-known, well-loved broadcaster with his wonderful spoken word programs on Radio 4, which many of you will have heard. And today, as Helen has said, we're going to be discussing his latest book, which is called Many Different Kinds of Love, and also has a subtitle. It's a story of life, death, and the NHS. And of course, Michael is already known as a passionate supporter of the NHS. And back in 2007, at the 60th anniversary of the NHS, he wrote a very famous poem called These Are the Hands, which is much loved and is quoted in this latest book about the NHS and about the reasons why people in this country value it so much. It's a very, very moving poem, and it's been much quoted over this last 18 months of the COVID crisis. So Michael, it's a great joy to welcome you to the Just Festival. And I suppose in setting out to write this book, you faced an unusual structural problem in that you were writing about an experience for the first sort of 6 weeks of which you were pretty well out of it, really unaware of what was going on, or only hazily so, and suffering from delirium, at one point put into a therapeutic coma so that you could recover better from the illness. So how did you decide to tackle that situation? It must have been a really unique problem for you as a writer and storyteller to be telling a story for a chunk of which you had been completely absent.
Yes, thanks very much for that, Joyce. Thank you for the generous introduction. Yes, indeed. In fact, the starting point for the writing was really asking questions and trying to answer them, if you like. So what I was doing was sitting in my hazy state. So as you've said, I was in the induced coma for 40 days. I was in intensive care for 48, and then I was in rehabilitation. We'll come back to that. So all through that period, you could say from day 0 to maybe 60, 70 days, I was really, to start off with, knowing nothing because I was unconscious. And then as I came round, it was all very puzzling to me, and I would remember some things and forget others. And my wife Emma would tell me something and I'd forget it the next day. And that went on for weeks, really. So part of the sort of impulse to pick up a pen and start writing was to say, well, what was that about? What happened then? In fact, I kept pleading with Emma, I remember at one point, say, can you give me a timeline? Can we draw a timeline? Because I couldn't hold it in my head. I mean, part of the sort of post-induced coma, post-COVID immediately is that you have brain fog. That's what people describe. And I had it in spoonfuls. And so I was trying to sort of figure it out. So you can see I'm miming what I was doing. I would write a bit, I'd scribble a bit, and then I kept doing it in my sort of slightly desultory way. And then it sort of started to form a narrative with holes in. And then I was reminded that sitting on the table was something I hadn't really looked at, which is this. I'll hold it up to the camera and you can see it says patient diary. This diary can be completed by relatives, friends, nurses, doctors, and allied health professionals to record the patient's daily events. This diary will be given to the patient on discharge from critical care, or if appropriate, when recovering on critical care. The diary may help, and so on. And so I didn't really want to read this. I've got a picture in my mind of it sitting on the kitchen table amongst all the beautiful well-wishings and so on, and me kind of looking at it thinking, I don't really want to look in it. And then in the end I did. and was utterly overwhelmed because there's about 40 letters from nurses. I'll hold that up and you can see those, handwritten, coming in off their 12-hour shifts. Nurses not necessarily trained in critical care. They could have been voice therapists, physiotherapists, and so on, writing to me and saying what I look like and how I am and wanting me to get better. And so then as I was piecing this all together, I thought and said to the editor, the publishers, well, we could include some of those. And that was the way it evolved, exactly as you described. They're the magic link. They're the people that enable me to see myself sitting in bed from day 1 of the induced coma to day 40.
That's, I mean, it's really fascinating to read those. I mean, obviously, after that period, the book moves on into a sort of poetic, or, you know, a sort of long extended poem about your own experience of it. But I wonder whether, just to give people who haven't yet had a chance to read the book a little flavour of it, Michael, you might like to read. I don't know if you've got any particular favourites. I saw a couple around page 32, 33, which I found very, very moving. But if you've got a favourite.
No, let's do that. So let's have from this one. Good morning, Michael. It's a pleasure to look after you. I'm Pat, a lung nurse specialist currently working in ITU to help the wonderful ITU nurses look after you. It's lovely to see all the photos of your family smiling and showing how much you're loved. We'll keep you comfortable and talk to you all through the shift to let you know what we're doing. My kids were brought up on your poems and loved them. We've given you a lovely wash and brushed your thick hair. And then it says a little note, at 13:30 hours, Michael started blinking his eyes and moving both arms and legs. He squeezed the doctor's hand to respond to her questions. Michael confirmed that he was uncomfortable. He was repositioned and given some pain relief. And then let's hear Lizzie says, hi, Michael, night shift. My name is Lizzie and I'm your helper tonight. I'm normally a physio working in outpatients, but I'm currently helping out. I looked after you on one of your first nights, so it's so lovely to see how far you've come. You still have a breathing tube going into your throat, meaning you aren't able to speak. So unfortunately for you, it's mostly me chatting away to you. I seemed to get a response when I mentioned that you supported Arsenal, judging from your pictures, but you didn't seem impressed when I told you I was a Derby County fan. You're currently sleeping very peacefully and look very comfortable. So that was from Lizzie. Yes, that's right. And then a lovely one there, Sarah. So this is this is into May, and so on. So, and this leads up to 7th of May. Dear Michael, happy birthday. And I know, because they've told me, that they stood round my bed singing me happy birthday. I have zero memory of this. I mean, it sounds quite funny to me now, but certainly back in July and August, it did get me. I was quite upset to think about the fact that they all stood round the bed singing me happy birthday, and I have no idea who these people are and how they were. I was cradled by them in their care and attention and, well, is there another word? Love, for getting me better. That's what they wanted me to do. Get better. We're going to get you better. It's amazing.
Yeah. I don't think I had fully realised that, as well as the professional, you know, the trained or usual ICU nurses and the kind of, you know, the sort of medical experts that were surrounding you, that they were also sort of staff from whole other areas of the NHS coming in just to do this special job of kind of accompanying people. You know, they weren't making the major medical decisions or even the major medical measurements, but they were observing you and sitting with you and making sure that if anything went wrong, then one of the nurses or specialists could be called. And I just wasn't really aware until I read your book that was going on.
Well, it was an emergency. So my ward, which would normally take 11 people, had 24. The normal discipline is 1 nurse per bed. So for 24 hours a day without break, there is someone next to you in case you suddenly pull something out. You know, if you think you've got, I was on ventilator, so in there, up, you know, in my throat, I had a trachea in there, obviously drips, and you can easily suddenly smash and break your way out of those. So That's what you normally have, but actually trained nurses were sometimes 1 to 3 beds, 1 to 4 beds. So these people recruited from parts of the hospital which were less involved in emergency were absolutely crucial. But of course, they weren't trained in intensive care. And so what you have to bear in mind, the trauma for them. So 42% of my ward were dying as I was on there. And so you're saying to young people not trained in mortality, in treating people who might literally die as you're touching them or as you're applying something, they might just die in front of you and then again the next day, that this level of trauma, some of those people were not, as it were, trained for it. I'm not going to say they couldn't cope, but I've seen a film of me in hospital, 2020, The Story of Us, and it got too much for some of them. You can see there's one of the nurses, not as it happens in my hospital, another one, and she comes home and she breaks down. It's too much for her, and you can see, I mean, they're on the shifts, and the level of trauma in a professional way, the story has hardly been told. I mean, it has a bit, and I'm glad it has.
Yeah. And at one point in the book, you ask, why did they try so hard? Because you've observed in your own sort of conversations with, not with friends, obviously, but with people on Twitter and so on, that some people just seem to have a kind of attitude that once you get to a certain age, it's not really worth putting up that kind of huge fight to save life. And but it seems that in your case, there was never any question that everyone was completely committed to trying to get you through this.
Well, that's a comment, Joyce, on where we've been and perhaps where we're at, which is there is a really huge gulf, massive dichotomy between the way the NHS has behaved, the way the health workers, all of them, have behaved, and a kind of residual pool which expresses an attitude. Sometimes it's hidden behind a phrase like herd immunity, but other times quite bluntly. So you're describing there a Twitter encounter I had with quite a famous journalist who shall be nameless. And she had leapt upon the idea that some of us who had described long COVID, somebody then had said somewhere or other that we had been lurid or had exaggerated it. So I couldn't resist taking the mickey. And so I said something like, yes, I was hiding under the table all through the time. I said I was in intensive care. I wasn't really ill at all. So she came back to me and said, no, of course, you were ill, Michael, but you're 74. And just think about that. You were ill, but you're 74. So there's a kind of axis on that sentence on but. And I ask in the poem, what is but about being 74? Well, clearly in the minds of some people in the face of this pandemic is that there were a range of people over 70s, the vulnerable, those with underlying health problems, whole set of little phrases which medics use, that's fine, but they're not making a social comment, they're making medical comments. And people leapt on this stuff and juggling around with statistics, decided that a whole chunk of the population was dispensable or less worth saving. Indeed, somebody who I can mention, Toby Young, did the maths on it and sat there calculating and wrote an article in which he worked out, do we really want to spend this kind of money on the old people? I mean, what are the returns? And so on. So, I could collect together a variety of quotes. There was a journalist in the Telegraph who said, speaking from a purely economic point of view, might not the culling of the old be mildly beneficial? Just put all that together. Purely from an economic point of view, as if somehow the economy is separate from people, then having done that little particular incision, okay, that little piece of separating out, you then talk about culling old people as being mildly beneficial. I don't want to misquote him. And so you get something there, if you like, it's a kind of pool and a vision of society in which there are the worthy, unstated, and then at the very least, less worthy. And so for the first time in my life, I mean, as you can imagine, I'm a white middle-class person, in many ways privileged, and I've benefited from that, obviously, and suddenly feeling this kind of cold air, this rush of cold air as being described either directly, as this unnamed journalist did, or indirectly as somehow or other being less worthy of life. It's been absolutely staggering to see it, and to see it so rapidly happening to great swathes of society, and people imagining they're not saying anything kind of problematic. Well, all I'm saying is old people die. You know, what's the matter with that? And you go, well, hang on, days are where we live. Is my day less worthy than your day? Just explain that to me. Is somebody with a stick less worthy? And of course, disabled people, I'm saying something like this, and I can imagine disabled people going, so now you know, what have we been trying to say for the last 50 years? Listen, Michael, well, okay, I'm tuning in.
Yeah, fascinating. And also, I mean, I do myself find it hard to believe that if 135,000 people had died in circumstances where it's almost certain that given different government decisions, about half of them, at least probably, could have been saved. I mean, some countries have had very, very low death tolls from this virus because of the actions their government have taken. We've had a very high one. And I just wonder whether that number, if that number had died and they had all been vigorous young male rugby players in their 20s, would there have been the same sort of tolerance for it? Would there have been the kind of political silence around it? I really doubt it. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I can't help but think, when a plane falls out the sky, you know this better than all of us in Scotland, one thing and another, that when there is terrible things happen, we can think back to the awful, awful tragedy of Aberfan. You can number the tragedies that have gone on, anybody who's lived for as long as I have, pile-ups on the motorway, terrible, terrible stuff. And of course, we've lamented those things quite rightly. And, it's an outpouring of grief. And we think, there but for the grace of, go I, that sort of sense of, what a close shave it sometimes is in life. And then, as you say, as the figures mounted bit by bit, it sort of, there was a kind of numbness from the centre, if you like, that, and it was expressed from Westminster a couple of times, like, more people are going to die. Whoa. Just the expression. And we know that some of the talk behind the scenes, bodies piling up, that sort of stuff, was indeed quite flippant. And of course, there is another element on top of the old, the vulnerable, the underlying health problems kind of parameters. We know also that it's affected people, so-called BAME community, disproportionately. And it leaves out the whole business of long COVID. Because this illness is so peculiar, they've managed to somehow or other excise that from the calculation. There are thousands and thousands of people in great difficulty in their lives for a variety of reasons, either because it's affected their nervous system, their heart, their circulation system, or indeed their skeletal system, the joints and so on. And this is a price to pay for this illness as well. And we don't know, with it kind of running fairly free now in a mild conditions, whether there's many people will suffer from the long COVID as a consequence of that. I know it's an unknown, but even so, there's a way in which, I mean, it's analogous. You've got to be very, very careful here. I'm not saying it's the same as war. Obviously, it isn't. No guns, no bombs, no bullets. But the kind of social effect. I mean, when I was brought up, I was born in 1946. I was used to seeing people who had injuries because of the war, both wars, actually. You'd see people from First and Second World Wars. And there's just something about this. It kind of reminds me of the fact that you've got this huge number of fatalities and then people affected by it. We get in rooms and we talk about it. And it reminds me of people that I knew, teachers and so on, talking about what they saw, grandparents talking about the trenches and so on. Of course, it's not the same, and I'm not saying it's the same, but there's a sort of a social trauma. There's personal traumas, but social trauma involved in how we are dealing with it now and how we will be still dealing with it in 5 and 10 years' time.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you can begin to see writers and artists beginning to work around that, particularly the trauma of people who weren't able to be with their loved ones when they died and weren't really able to have any kind of normal funeral, or and I think there's going to be a huge kind of long long psychological and emotional impact of that. And I can see one or two shows and sort of rituals beginning to emerge now where people are trying to do that. But I do know that at Christmas, for instance, the Eden Court Theatre in Inverness put up a special tree and simply put a light on it for every person in the Highland region, which is Eden Court's kind of catchment area, who had died, which was, you know, several hundred, or, you know, there was a fixed figure which they went for these number of lights. And it became like a little place of pilgrimage, really, for people who had lost someone, because it was one of the few public acknowledgements at that time, just at the end of 2020, of this bereavement that had been going on. But I think we'll perhaps have to wait until, you know, the peak trauma is over before we begin to realise exactly how deep that may have gone. Anyway, after the hospital period, Michael, you did emerge, although it's interesting that you still weren't really remembering or knowing things, you know, 6 weeks after you had first become seriously ill. You know, your birthday was about 5 or 6 weeks after you were first taken into hospital, and there you were, not knowing much. But anyway, you emerged and you went to a respite hospital and then home, and you began to write about the experiences that you could remember, which involved some really striking sort of dreams and almost visions that you had in your sort of recovery period. There was a period when you were having sort of mild hallucinations, which is quite common with people who have been in intensive care for a long time. But yeah, so there was this segment which kind of gave you the title for the book, Many Different Kinds of Love. And I wondered if you'd like to read that to us. I've got the page, it's 50, 58, 59, I think, yeah.
Good, we'll get there. I'm looking with my good eye at the page.
Yeah. So
a doctor asks me whether I've had hallucinations or nightmares or terrifying delirium. I say no. She says that they're getting reports that people who've been in intensive care are experiencing this and they're troubled by it. Are you? I say no. She says, we gave you a lot of mind-changing drugs. So we wouldn't be surprised if you said you were suffering from this. Were you upset or agitated by anything like this? I said that I dream the Christmas carol and write a new version in my head and then become distressed that I can't write it down. She says, I also keep dreaming of a German Christmas party. It's always the same part. I've never been to a German Christmas party, but I'm sitting outside at night in a garden wrapped in blankets, and I know that I can't move my legs. My legs won't move. Someone explains that they throw purple berries into the air. They do it. They throw the berries in the air. The berries burst with a flash like little stars, and everyone cheers. Hey! They tell me the word for the purple berries is Wasbeeren. Again, the berries burst in the night sky, and everyone cheers. Hey! I have that dream again and again, I say. She says. Nothing terrifying? I'm disturbed by another dream. I imagine that just before I got ill, I came across a statement, a kind of manifesto from a German farmer. It was a reply to the hate coming from neo-Nazis in his neighborhood. He comes towards me wearing a stone-washed bib and brace. He stands alongside his 1950s tractor with his family around him. His manifesto tells how we can only go on if we love each other. We have to find many different kinds of love, he says. Love for lovers, love for our children, love for our colleagues, love even for people we don't know. If we don't, we'll destroy ourselves. What makes me sad about this dream is that I keep getting to the point where I'm thinking, where is this manifesto? Who is the farmer? I feel sure he gave it to me before I got ill. How did I get to meet him and his family? Where was it? And then he goes. It's not nightmarish, more a matter of regret that I've lost track of something. So this I haven't quite said in that piece how what upset me as well was that it kept recurring, and then when I could feel the dream coming on me, I then had another layer of sadness. I'd go, oh no, is that dream coming? And I was powerless to stop it. In fact, I mean, they're both beautiful dreams. I mean, I can see the berries bursting in the air. And I'm so gratified that this farmer has come forward. And when I came home, you know, I said to Emma, I said, Emma, have we got a manifesto somewhere written by a German farmer? And she went, no. I said, oh, right. No, I dreamt it then. Because I couldn't even distinguish between dream and reality. So I asked her the question because I thought maybe she'd go, yeah, I've got it here, actually. Yes, his name was, you know, Fritz Puchner or something, you know, and I'd go, great. No.
It's really fascinating that you kind of, your mind, some part of your mind gave that idea to a German farmer, though. I mean, does that come from somewhere very deep because your family were Jewish and you know, this need for reconciliation with all that's happened in Germany, you know?
I think it's more that, you know, every time I read about Eastern Germany and the AfD, you know, the Alternative für Deutschland, you know, or see them on the television, you know, of course I wince, you know, but why should I wince more because it's happening in Germany than it's happening in Holland or indeed here, you know, somewhere in Britain, or indeed famously and awfully in Norway. And so I think it's the idea that, it was, in fact, it's a message of hope, isn't it? And somehow I sort of like to think it's that this chap who's like very ordinary in the sense that he's a farmer, you know, he's not somebody working it all out at the Humboldt University in Berlin. You know, this is a guy working it out for himself, which I love, you know. And so, yes, it's a kind of, it's not wish fulfillment, isn't it? It's the other thing. It's kind of where you're wishing for something, but you may not get it. And I think that's what it is. I mean, in my mind, as far as the Jewish and Germany is concerned, I was very fortunate by having parents who always said, because they knew people who had resisted the Nazis, both before they came and during, and always said, this is about Nazism, not about Germany. And they would always try to make that clear to me as I was growing up. Now, you might say it's very kind of didactic and sort of very dry, but it was their firm belief. My dad was stationed in Berlin at the end of the war. And one of his sort of amazing memories, and I can't find any record of this online, was that he was in the American Army and he saw the first stages of a peace movement in Berlin on the street. And it was called something like the Peace and Justice Movement or something like that. And he took photographs of it. And as far as I've never seen photographs of it anywhere else. And then the occupying forces squashed it. And he would always tell us this story that here was this group of people, you know, walking, you know, totally against what was allowed, marching down a street with banners. And so I can see a link between the kinds of things my dad said. He went to the first cabaret after the war in the basement of what is now the Ellington Hotel, a little cabaret called Uhlenspiegel, which I have seen written up. But those demos I've never ever seen written up anywhere. So my dad is a documenter of that. And maybe that's in the back of my mind as well, you know, that there is this record somewhere. My dad took these pics. Who's got the pictures? Oh, my brother. I'm sure he has, etc.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Right, let's see if anyone from the audience wants to chip in here. We're having quite a few comments I can see about the pay situation, you know, the fact that the response, certainly from the UK government to the amazing job that NHS workers have done over the last year has been so stingy. I wonder, Helen or Grant, can you see anyone who'd like to actually ask Michael a question about that, or should we just go by the questions in the Q&A?
I think the questions in the Q&A at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's one from Heather Kiernan, and she says, she attended your address to Unison back in May, that's the union, and know that you have been backing the campaign that all employees of the NHS should be given an increase of wages of at least £2,000. And while it is not a problem in Scotland, she says, it's certainly not so much of a problem, where they were given a 4% increase, Boris Johnson and his cabinet have been loath to give NHS staff any recognition of what they have achieved. So you've been campaigning on this, have you, Michael?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's contemptible. It really is. You know, we can put into the mix the appalling corruption that we know has gone on with the handing out of contracts, and indeed the lack of fulfilling those contracts properly, but in huge, huge sums of money. And let it be said, you know, these weren't taken out of a government handbag. These were done by the means of the way government does produce cash. That's to say, they write a little note to the Bank of England and say, give us the cash. I mean, why Theresa May got away with saying there's no magic money tree when it's exactly what they do have. They do actually have a magic money tree, and they have two or three of them. One is, please give us the cash. Another one is to sell bonds to the Bank of England, who then produce cash. And of course, they can sell bonds out on the open market. So, I mean, they do have magic money trees, and they certainly produce them. Let's not name names, you know, in order to get test and trace and all the other stuff, and dodgy contracts for PPE, which didn't turn up, or indeed in my ward, some of it turned up with blood on it, would you believe? That's absolutely documented, by the way. I haven't said anything untrue. So, you know, and the strain, I mean, the unbelievable strain on everybody, doctors, nurses, health workers of every kind during that period, and the love that people felt for them, and the gratitude and so on. And they've sort of tried to drive a kind of rift by saying, oh, they're worth 1%. I think this applies, as you say, to England rather than Scotland, and then saying, all right, okay, 3%. So it's sort of a little kind of grudging thing. And so you then see these terrible arguments going on online with people going, oh, well, if you're going to pay the nurses, well, what about the police? And what about, well, nobody's saying don't pay them anymore. What was on the table was, what do we pay the nurses? So they're nurses and everybody else, the other all health workers. And so it is outrageous that we're talking about this kind of penny pinching nonsense in a situation in which they did genuinely create money. They broke all the rules that we've been living by for the previous 20 years. Oh, you can't borrow that amount of money. Otherwise, you know, the whole economy will go down. And we kind of, you know, we had to buy that, listening to it from economists. And then suddenly they changed all the rules and said, well, you can actually, because you just go like this. Dear Bank of England, give us the dosh. Bank of England gives you the dosh, you do it. And now they're trying to kind of go back to the pre-COVID situation and say, oh, we've got to pay for it by sort of tightening our belts and being very, very careful, and telling all the poor people to be more poor. What? Well, how does that work? So it is an extraordinary moment, however you want to put it, in the history of capitalism or in the history of Britain, in which they're asking these health workers who've done all this work to somehow or other pay for the fact that they asked the Bank of England for some dosh. I mean, it's...
I know. It's remarkable how much of a magic money tree there is when it's something that they deem to be worth the expenditure. And the one thing that they never seem to deem to be worth the expenditure is good wages for hardworking public sector employees. It's really a shame.
Yeah, you said the P word there, public or people. There's an X certificate over that, Joyce. Don't mention people.
I know.
Mention the E word, economy. Don't mention P for people.
Yeah, invest in everything but, which is increasingly getting on one's nerves. Anyway, I've got some other questions here, a couple of direct questions. Sylvie Jill Wilkes is inquiring for your eye and ear, Michael, because in the aftermath of your severe phase of your illness, you really had quite severe problems with one of your eyes and one of your ears. I don't know if it was on the same side, but is that improving, or are you kind of stuck with a dodgy eye and a dodgy ear now in perpetuity?
Right, so COVID is a respiratory illness. We all know that bit, people coughing and not being able to breathe, which is what happened to me. But it's clearly also an illness that affects the nervous system as well. So in my case, it basically knocked out the optic nerve here in this eye and knocked out the auditory nerve in my ear and the feeling in my toes, and probably the you know, you've got semicircular canals inside your ear that does your balance, and I get dizzy and occasionally vertigo, you know, when the whole world spins around. So clearly COVID attacked my nervous system. So there's no chance of the ear getting better. there's, I think, a percentage chance that the eye might sort of creep into better. I can just see the outline of my face there. I can see, can't really see anything behind. I've had both cataracts removed, so I have new plastic lenses. You can't see those, but I've got plastic lenses. And I've also got laser holes in the backs of my eyes. And I've also got, believe it or not, a little plastic tube in my left eye. So this eye drains properly. So there you go. I've had lots of nice eye operations, a very strange experience, which I like writing about. I've just written a new poem for the paperback version of the book about the wonderful Mr. Sharma pulling out my lens. And I think of Shakespeare and think, pluck out his eyes, out, vile jelly. So anyway, yes. So I couldn't help thinking of that.
Yeah, so you still got some problems in those.
And so it's because it's that side, you know, I end up sort of, Emma finds it not so funny, but we've got a couple of chairs stacked up in the kitchen. Every time I walk past them, I kick them because I don't know I'm kicking them because it's on that side. So I'm a bit lopsided. So I have to watch all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sylvie also asks whether you've had a chance to meet any of the nurses that looked after you during that acute phase of your illness since you left hospital.
In real life, I've met Margie, who is one of the nurses who writes me a letter in the book. And I met her purely coincidentally while we were filming that 2020, The Story of Us, which you can see on the ITV hub. And we were sitting talking, me and Professor Hugh Montgomery, and a nurse went past and then she came back and she went, Michael. And I said, yes. And she said, I'm Margie. I help look after you in intensive care. And then we both became quite emotional. I could see she was almost shocked. I kind of thought at that moment that she was sort of thought that I was a ghost because I've seen bits of film and I looked dead. So I sort of thought a little bit, kind of, you know, imagination taking me there, that somehow or other she thought I was dead. So I've sort of written a piece where I imagine I'm what's called a dibuk. That's Yiddish for a ghost, a Jewish ghost. So I decide that I'm a Jewish ghost in the poem. Anyway, and so Margie and I talked, and then she was upset, and then I got upset that she was upset, because this is the bit that I found really difficult to hang on to, which is the extent to which this stuff mattered and matters to these people on these lousy wages, that we matter to them as human beings. We're just a bunch of tubes, something else I say in the book, but they treat us as whole people and they know who we are, even when we're lying there like that. Sorry, that's my imitation of myself half dead. And yet it was the total human being. And so she was upset just to see me. And so I got upset with that. So I've seen Margie. I've also met Carmel, the Irish nurse, on telly. They brought us together on one of the telly channels, and it was incredible because she's like a walking poet. And the way she talked was just wonderful. She's in the book. And then I was also met on radio. There was a program called The Reunion, Radio 4. And I met a couple of the workers, health workers in that program as well. I couldn't quite see them because it was on a Zoom call. And so that's as far as I've got. I do very much want to go to the rehabilitation hospital where they, after all, they did teach me how to stand up. Yeah, and how to walk. Yeah, and I do desperately want to see them. So I was waiting for all clears on mask wearing and everything else to see whether I could go down there maybe in a month's time and hope to see Ashma, who you know, made me throw a balloon in order to make myself stand up. You know, because all your core goes. So she'd say, "Throw the balloon." I said, "I can't throw the balloon." Michael, throw the balloon. Anyway, all that.
Great. I see Helen's reappeared. Does that mean you've got a question or comment?
I'm just reappearing to say that this is the chance for people, if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question, please do. I'll try and keep an eye out for anyone who's wanting to do that. I do have one question that I'd like to pop in. I'm not able to type into this because I'm hard. One question I have is that there's a lot of conversation now around the arts community about commemoration, memorialization, that type of thing. I suppose there's lots of people who have very different feelings about, are we fixing this in a point of time, or is this something, what are the things that we need, do you feel we should be considering around this, if we should be doing it at all?
Yeah.
I think that the bereaved must have control over that. So there is the COVID Justice UK, who I think represent a large number of the bereaved. And so I've supported everything that they've said. There is the Wall of Hearts in London, but people need local things, just as Joyce described. I had not heard of this in Inverness, in order to commemorate the people who've died in the Highlands. So we need local and we need national. I did support the idea of a memorial at St. Paul's. I mean, St. Paul's is not a part of my culture particularly, or Westminster Abbey. No, St. Paul's, I think they said. But at the same time, the C of E in England is supposed to be the home for everybody, no matter what faith or no faith. And so I kind of thought, well, that would be all right. I've been to St. Paul's and I like it there. So, I can remember pictures of medieval and late medieval cathedrals full of everybody, selling things and buying things in churches and so on, and markets and I don't know, all sorts of fun and games. So I suddenly thought that maybe that was appropriate, but I don't know what's happened to that. So I think we do need local and a national memorial of some sort. And when I say national, of course, that means Scotland as a nation as well. Obviously, I'm saying this as an Englishman. And so we do need those, so people have a place to go and to talk. I mean, I've been to a form of national memorial. My father's uncles and aunt were deported from France to Auschwitz. And there's a wall of names in Paris. And you think at one level, it's just a wall and it's just got their names on. But when you actually get there and you see the convoys they went on and you take part in a commemoration, and suddenly you're meeting people who are the grandchildren, or like me, the great nephew, and you're just talking. I mean, I was talking to a man who said that he lost all his grandparents, all of them. And I just stood there next to the wall and he was standing next to the name of his grandparents' names, and I was standing next to the name of my father's uncle. And it transformed me in some respects, because I was sort of suddenly feeling that what this was part of. I mean, the fact that it's another country as well, you see. So I think you never know what conversations take place. It's what all artists and sculptors say, that when you do a painting or a sculpture or theatre as well, you create a space in which conversations take place around the material thing. And these are powerful and you can't legislate for them. They happen and people are moved by them and they touch each other and feel with each other. And that's important. If you just leave us alone in private, I mean, there's part of me, I'm mourning for the person I was. It's fine, I write a lot and I talk a lot, and so that helps. But there's thousands and thousands of people, and I'm reminded again of those war people. Roger McGough wrote a wonderful poem about his uncle dodging the bullets, sitting in the front room, never talking about it, ducking the shells, in his home in Liverpool. And, we could repeat this if we're not careful, of the trauma just being internalized, or to use the jargon, introjected. So where you take the trauma into you, and this is dangerous. You mustn't do this. We must have ways of expelling it, expressing it, taking it out of ourselves and sharing it. This is a shared experience.
Yeah, I think it's very important that it's not just individual, and actually not just even a family thing, that there has to be public recognition of what has been a national and a global tragedy. And I think that really matters to people. And the business of naming the dead is so important, because as long as people remain nameless, it's easy for people just to depersonalize them and talk as if their deaths were less important. There's another good question from Sylvie. She says, Emma, your wife, as well as the nurses, is the heroine of your recovery. And that's certainly true. Her kind of steadfast encouragement and belief and constant reassurance that you would get better is a kind of key feature of the book, and the efforts she went to communicate with you even at your lowest. when she wasn't even allowed to visit the hospital. Sylvie asks, was it a deliberate intention from your book, or are you trying to send the message that families play a huge role in the recovery of patients?
I think I just was telling it as it is, and I can't even encompass in my mind, as you say, you use the word steadfast, which I love, it's a lovely word, the steadfastness of Emma, that if I put myself in her shoes, I become feeble. If I imagine she's sitting there in hospital and I'm at home waiting for the phone or ringing up, I just fear that I wouldn't have been able to cope in the way that she did. And so the idea that she could sit here day after day after day, I mean, it's just 40 days. I mean, you know, not knowing whether you could just cop it at any moment, and then indeed even in the bit after, you know, and it's just, it wasn't an empty house. We got 2 children and so on, but you know, I just think of the nights. I just think, God, blimey, that must have been anyway. So to start off with, I was just describing the reality of it, and then obviously when I sort of sit back from it, yeah, we all need support. We are human beings and we're animals, and we need support and we need comfort and we need all these things. And whatever arrangements we have in life, you know, I'm not somebody who believes it's got to be a man and a woman, you know, whatever arrangements we meet in our life, whether they're vertical or horizontal or whatever way we do it, then that's what we need, that's what we have. And these they comfort us and save us, because they give us the validity. I believe there's something called, somebody talked about it, the Fishian mirror. That's to say where you see yourself in the affection you get from others. Someone will signpost it for me. But the point is, you don't know if you're worthy unless you see somebody else saying you're worth it. It's a mirror effect. So you can't just, you know, this is the desperation of solitary confinement. You know, when you're in solitary confinement, the idea is you're so demoralized is that you do not think you're worthy. That's the nature of the punishment. We're not going into it, but the point is, how do you know? So that's part of how you survive. I mean, I had a hernia op a few years ago, and the doctor, just before he was about to put me under, he said, I was the person who operated on your dad. And I said, oh yes. He said, did you know that he gave up? And this was quite sort of difficult thing to say. And he said that he got to a point where he was so ill and so on that he couldn't go on. Now, my dad knew he was worthy, but that sense that you can give up life has affected me quite a lot since Mr. Mushtaq told me that. And I just sort of think that whatever decision people come to, but if you make the decision you want to live, it's very, very necessary that you have people to agree with you, to think that it is a good idea you live. This is the trauma of this whole thing I'm saying about journalists and politicians, whatever, telling us that we were dispensable. That's like saying, what? We're not worthy then? So you bet we need the personal, we need the people near to us, parents, children, or cousins, or it doesn't matter which way, lovers of any kind, to say, actually, you're okay, you know. And then you go, oh, am I? Oh, that's nice, lovely. Ooh.
Yeah, and I suppose even for those who are alone in the world, or who, because of age, have just lost most of their loved ones, the NHS does that for all of us. And that's why it is so profoundly important. It's a kind of political act of love that bears us all up. I've had a lovely request from someone anonymous who has asked whether you could end by reading these other hands, Michael. Would you be willing to do that?
Yes, I'd love to do that.
And just before that, my final question, I think, would be, do you think there's anything, any key thing that we could all be doing to try to make that sort of feeling of love and care that comes from the ideal of the NHS and from its practice during the pandemic? Is there anything we can all do to make more of a political force of that, given that we've been governed for so long, really, by a political ideology that measures all things by cash rather than humanity? Is there any way we can make this a political turning point?
Well, I like what you said about names, because the moment we say the names and the moment we have, you know, that's a lot of people. And the moment we say those names, then we attach the people to them. and we start thinking about why and how and what people did to try to keep them alive, and so on and so on. So my starting point would be that. I mean, obviously there's the fight for higher pay, which is a part of it in a way, because we're saying, look what they did, look what they tried to do, look at the trauma society has faced, and these people stepped into the breach and did that. Again, the war analogy, they were the troops, if that's what you want to say. So we want to reward them, and at the same time remember who went down, pour la patrie, as they say in France, but mort pour la patrie, but they weren't for the nation. They didn't do it deliberately or knowingly. We just got caught, and that in that it must be a full and public understanding of what long COVID is in its many forms. So, but I would start with the names that you said, Joyce. That seems to me that, you know, we need to recite those. If you go to France, I know again this is war, but once a year they recite the names on the war memorials, and it you know, this is whatever it is, you know, 70, 80 years later. But we could do this for a while with the names. It's a huge number, but we could do it locally. Anyway, there we are. It's a thought. Yeah. Names.
Okay. The poem, thank you, to finish, because we're just about out of time, sadly.
Yeah. These are the hands that touch us first. Feel your head, find the pulse, and make your bed. These are the hands that tap your back, test the skin, hold your arm, wheel the bin, change the bulb, fix the drip, pour the jug, replace your hip. These are the hands that fill the bath, mop the floor, flick the switch, soothe the sore, burn the swabs, give us a jab, throw out sharps, design the lab. And these are the hands that stop the leaks, empty the pan, wipe the pipes, carry the can, clamp the veins, make the cast, log the dose, and touch us last.
Thank you so much, Michael. That is absolutely beautiful. It's a wonderful poem. And thank you for the book, which is a wonderful document of this strange and moving and hopefully sort of transformative 18 months that we've all been through. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'd all like to give you a round of applause if you could hear us, but that's been an absolutely wonderful session. And I hope you'll be back at Just Festival again in the future.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Joyce. And thank you, Helen. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for having me.
Well, on behalf of Just Festival and everyone in the audience, we did have about 20 questions here and comments, all kind of wishing you well and actually supporting the NHS workers, you know, hugely. And so it's wonderful to have someone continually fighting on your side and being able to raise that profile. I also want to plug at the end of the Just Festival, we have a new commission called No Alleluias, the Requiem for 2020. And it's our response, feeling it's very difficult to have a festival during, you know, after such an experience. How do we mark a festival and have joy, you know, during August? And we can't really go on as if nothing ever happened. And so we have a new choral commission by Anthony Hammond with lyrics by Robert Ray, which is a combination of professional singers and an online NHS choir of frontline workers. And it's a story of a woman who was speaking to us last year about the loss of her father to COVID, and also her experience as a reverend of really in a moment of crisis of how does she respond as she got unwell, lost her father, plus also had to find a way to look after her parish of a poor Black community in Ohio in the States. That's on the 20th of August. And if anyone in the audience would like to finish a kind of follow through on the kind of conversation that you've been having and take it further, then that would be a really nice event to attend. So Michael, thank you so much again. And I'll say good night to everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you again,
Thank you.
Michael.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Joyce.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.